My name is Nora Hale, and 35 felt like a cliff-edge wind in my face, nowhere to go but forward. 2 months after signing the last set of divorce papers, I put the binder with my name on the spine back on its shelf and told myself out loud, "You're allowed to build something that's yours." The marriage had frayed long before it snapped. Ethan, my ex, had a talent for apologies that sounded like weather reports, factual. Emotionless, as if cheating were just an unfortunate drizzle, he forgot to mention before I went outside. The day I confronted him, he stared at the floor and said, "It didn't mean anything." I looked at the calendar on the wall and replied, "It meant months." When I finally left, the part that stung wasn't the paperwork, it was the phone call to my parents. "Don't be rash, my mother," Lydia said, the clatter of dishes in the background. "Ethan provides stability." "I'm the head of finance at a logistics firm," I said, fighting to keep my voice even. "I'm stable." She sighed the way she used to when I brought home B+ report cards. "You've always overestimated that office job." It wasn't new. In my family, Ivy, my younger sister, had always been the sun, and everyone else the orbit. When I was 16, I spent a summer shooting photos on a borrowed camera for a local contest. Ivy knocked the tripod over by accident, shattering the lens. She cried and got a new phone with a really good camera. I was told I should have taped the legs better. When I got my license, I inherited a minivan that died at red lights. Ivy turned 16 and received a new scooter with a ribbon on the handlebar. When I earned a modest merit scholarship, I took out loans to cover the rest. Ivy announced she needed a gap year abroad. My parents paid for 3 months on an island with bracelets and sunsets. I thought adulthood would balance scales by itself. It didn't. Ivy's ordinary choices were met with parades, mine with polite nods that felt like dismissal. Ethan loved hosting at the lake cabin we bought. After our second promotion, his then mine. The math of our split was boring and fair. I kept our condo downtown, the place with the long windows and the view of trains sliding through the city. He kept the cabin. For weeks, my parents pretended the law of property division was a personal insult. "That cabin is where we make memories," my father Paul said. "You can visit me at the condo," I offered. "It's not the same," my mother replied, measuring the word condo like it was a motel room. No dock, no garden. I started sleeping better once the arguments ran out of steam. The night softened. My friends insisted on Friday drinks that ended in laughter, not autopsies of my marriage. I put basil in the kitchen window. I bought a rug that Ethan once said looked busy and watched sunlight pour through patterns like confetti. A box labeled "Due Later" sat in the hallway. Every weekend I made it smaller. My 36th birthday was coming and I wanted to control one thing. I blocked the date on my calendar, then called my parents 7 weeks in advance. "I'm hosting," I said. "My place. I'll send details. I'd really like you there." A pause then. "We'll see," my mother said. "Your sister may have something that night." Something. Ivy often had somethings. I decided not to leave the evening vulnerable. I booked a small local caterer run by a couple who made lemon tarts that tasted like summer and roasted chicken with herbs I could pronounce. I strung warm bulbs across the balcony railing. I made a playlist that began with old soul and drifted into late-night coffee music. The plan sat inside me like a small, steady flame. Meanwhile, a thought I'd been ignoring kept tapping at the door. The cabin was gone, yes, but the idea of a place outside the city, quiet green with room for weekends, didn't have to disappear with it. I opened my laptop and typed acreage within an hour of downtown. Finally ready, texted Ray, a realtor, who had helped Ethan and me find the condo years ago, and who became a friend when the dust settled. "Ready?" I wrote back. "This time it's just me." We spent 2 Saturdays driving the radius. The first place was pretty on the listing and sad in person, like a smile that didn't reach the eyes. The second was perfect until the highway roared like a hairdryer across the back fence. The third turned down a gravel lane bordered by a stone wall and a row of maples so tall they made the noon light look like late afternoon. The cottage itself wasn't glamorous cedar siding and honest porch 2 dormer windows like eyebrows, but the yard opened into a meadow stitched with wildflowers, and a pear tree leaned near the kitchen window as if whispering a secret. "It feels like a complete sentence," I told Ray. We stood in the quiet and listened to insects stitching sound into air. Ray tapped numbers into her tablet. We talked contingencies, and then she lowered her voice. "You know this is fast. I've moved slowly enough for 10 years, I said. The offer went in on Monday. By Thursday, it was accepted. A week before my birthday, I signed at a sunlit conference table and left with a manila envelope full of papers and a plain silver key that looked heavier than it was. I drove out alone, parked in the gravel, and sat on the porch step while the afternoon settled. The house creaked in the right places. The tap in the kitchen sputtered, then ran clear. The bedroom smelled faintly of cedar and dust, as if it had been saving the air for me. I didn't tell my family. Not yet. I wanted the reveal to be mine, and I wanted it on my terms. I planned it like a scene, not a trap, after cake, after the toasts. I would lift a small box from under the coffee table, open it to show the key resting on black velvet, like a single note, and say, "I bought myself a place where the weekends are quiet." In my mind, there would be more smiles than questions. The week before my birthday blurred into lists. The caterer confirmed drop-off windows. Ray sent photos I could hardly stop staring at sun on the porch, a close-up of the pear tree blossoming out of season, thanks to some stubborn microclimate. I bought linen napkins because the paper ones felt like an apology. I stocked sparkling water for the abstainers and tucked a bottle of good champagne into the back of the fridge for after everyone left. The balcony bulbs worked on the first try, a small miracle worthy of gratitude. At the office, I was the same person I had always been, calm in audits exact with decimals, the one people asked when budgets fought each other. My team slipped a card onto my chair with a small sketch of a cabin someone had doodled in the corner. I closed my eyes for a second and let myself want the thing fully. On the morning of the party, the city was washed clean by an early rain. I opened the windows. Fresh bread from the bakery next door made the condo smell like a promise. I tucked the key box under the coffee table and set the serving platters in a straight line like sheet music. I checked my phone. The invitations had been clear, but I sent one last message to my parents anyway. Polite, direct, non-negotiable. "Today, 6 p.m. I'd love to see you." Ivy posted a photo of her manicure at 11 with the caption, "Big weekend, nothing unusual." I turned my phone face down, pressed the last bulb into its clip, and watched the amber filaments glow against the gray sky. It wasn't the old kind of anticipation, the kind that asks for permission and waits to be told what matters. It was the new kind, quiet, grounded, the feeling of finally steering your own car with both hands. I smoothed the tablecloth, took a long breath, and smiled at the door. Whatever was going to happen next would happen with the lights. I chose the food I served, the key in my pocket, and a story I would tell in my own voice. By late afternoon, the rain had rinsed the city into a brighter version of itself. My balcony bulbs looked almost theatrical against the washed sky, and the condo smelled like bread and lemon zest. I laid out plates in a neat run, checked that the playlist cued soft horns before the dance tracks, and slid the small velvet box with the silver key back under the coffee table. I didn't rehearse a speech. I wanted the moment to feel unforced, like a door that happens to be open when you walk past it. At 5:57 p.m., my phone lit up with a message from Ray, a short video of the cottage porch as the sun swept a gold bar across the railing. "For your nerves," she wrote. I watched it once, then again, and felt the kind of quiet you can stand on. The caterer arrived with trays that fogged at the edges. The woman in charge, Fran, set down a platter of rosemary chicken and gave me a conspiratorial wink that said, "You've got this, sweetheart." The first knock came right on 600. My friend June, punctual as a heartbeat, stepped in with a bottle wrapped in brown paper, and the kind of hug that steadies your bones. Behind her came Miguel and Priya from my team, then Rita from compliance, then a neighbor who'd watched me assemble the balcony lights and wanted to see how they turned out. I played host, the way I manage quarter-end circulating, taking the temperature of the room, refilling without asking, noting that the tarts were disappearing faster than the olives. Laughter spilled into the hallway and drifted back on a breeze when someone stepped onto the balcony. I let it carry me. At 6:20, I checked my phone. Nothing from my parents. At 6:31, I sent a nudge, polite, not pleading. "Traffic, text me your ETA." The message showed delivered and settled into the conversation like a coin at the bottom of a fountain. Time does strange stretching tricks when you're waiting for someone who's late and you can't decide if you're hurt or furious. At 6:45, Miguel tapped a glass with a fork and raised his eyebrows at me. "Me toast time," I shook my head. "Not yet." At 6:51, June materialized at my side with a plate and the look of a friend who's seen you hold your breath for years. "Eat," she said. "You can host and chew. It's legal." I smiled, bit into something buttery, and watched the door as if it might start speaking. 7 o'clock put its hand on the small of my back and pushed. I stepped into the hallway where the music softened and called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I called my father. Voicemail. I considered dialing Ivy and immediately pictured her phone flashing in a restaurant she'd chosen for its mirrors. I texted again, shorter this time, stripped of punctuation so it couldn't be read as need. "We've started. See you when you get here." Inside, the party had grown its own legs. Priya told a story about a budgeting meeting that ended with someone confusing accruals and croissants. Laughter folded and refolded. The lemon tarts lived up to their legend. Even the shy neighbor went in for seconds. Every now and then I saw my phone screen bloom with light, but never with the names I wanted. It was absurd how quickly the familiar old ache came back, the one that says you're optional to the people who should know better. June found me again. "If you want to do the thing," she said, softly nodding at the coffee table, "I'll run interference with any stray emotions." I didn't know whether to laugh or hand her a medal. 10 minutes, I said. "I'll give them 10 more minutes." I gave them 12 because old habits. At 7:23, something settled inside me. It wasn't resignation exactly. It was a change in the air. If the people who raised me wanted to be late to my life, that was their choreography. Mine would proceed. I slid the velvet box onto my palm and asked for everyone's attention. It wasn't perfect silence. The hallway light hummed. Someone cleared a throat, but quiet, pooled enough for a voice to carry. "I didn't bake this myself," I said, tilting my head at the tart so the pressure to applaud is low. A small laugh. "Good. But I did make something. Or I bought the start of something which feels close." I opened the box. The key looked almost theatrical against the velvet, a prop that meant what it said. Ray's video played on my phone, a slow pan across the porch, the quick shine of leaves. Gasps feel silly in movies and perfect in rooms like that. The questions came the way good questions do, layered with delight, flaring with specifics. How far? 45 minutes if the traffic behaves. Is there water? A meadow that looks like water when the wind moves. What will you plant herbs first? Pear pies if I become ambitious. When can we see it? Soon, I said and meant it. Miguel declared he'd bring a grill Emerson would be jealous of. Rita volunteered folding chairs. Someone suggested lawn bowling. June squeezed my elbow and whispered, "You look like someone who took off shoes that were killing her." I waited for envy that didn't arrive. Instead, the room rearranged itself around my news, the way people crowd in closer to see a photograph. Someone cued another song. The bulbs on the balcony made tiny halos on everyone's hair. I felt no other word for it celebrated. Not for surviving something, but for choosing something. Our glasses chimed, and this time I let myself be the person at the center without apologizing with my eyes. The night ran forward on quick feet. At 8:12, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it pass. At 8:39, a calendar alert, meaningless, a relic. At 9:04, still no answer from the people who had made it clear my party had to fit around Ivy's plans, whatever shape those took. When the cake emerged, simple, not girlish, dotted with slices of candied citrus, June carried the plates, and the room sang off key for the right reasons. I allowed myself to look directly at the empty space where 2 more plates could have gone, and then let the gaze move on the way you look over a river and decide not to count the branches snagged on the rocks. After 10 guests drifted out with promises instead of platitudes. Priya gathered cutlery like a heist, Miguel carted recycling to the chute, and my neighbor insisted on washing the serving spoons because people who bring lights get lucky. By 11:30, the condo had returned to itself, a little glow left in the bulbs, the lemon tart platter, a field of crumbs, the key box back under the table where it could practice being dramatic. June tugged on her raincoat and paused at the door. If they text later, she said, decide in daylight. I promised I would, and watched her umbrella bloom in the hall window. Midnight thinned the noises outside. I stood by the window and let the dark repay me in small currency, the hiss of tires on damp pavement, a siren far enough away to sound like a memory. The old urge rose. Tell your parents now, fold them into the circle, let the wound pretend to close. It was a habit as automatic as flipping a light switch in a room you're not entering. I turned away from it. Instead, I opened my photo roll. Ray's videos were better than dreams, less slippery. I typed a caption and kept it spare. Best gift I've given myself. No @ tags, no defensive emojis, just the pictures and the key, and the porch looking like a future you could sit on. I posted at 12:07 a.m., set the phone face down, and rinsed a last glass with hands that didn't shake. The sleep I fell into was not triumphant, not vindictive. It was the kind that lets you reach the deep shelf where the body puts things away. Morning found me with a coffee and buttered toast, and the ridiculous confidence that perhaps the world had decided to behave. My phone corrected me. Notifications rose like a storm graph missed calls, then messages that stacked on top of one another until the lock screen looked like static. I didn't open anything at first. I let the kettle sing again for a second cup. I stood barefoot on the cool tile and breathed until my shoulders remembered they belonged lower. When I did look, the names arranged themselves like a chorus. I could lip read. Mom, 3 missed calls. Dad, 2. Ivy, 1 call, 4 texts, a video bubble waiting to be played. Their messages had distinct sense even before I tapped Lydia's pressed flowers disapproval. Paul's masculine, let's be reasonable, Ivy's neon. I opened my mother's first because that was the story of my life. What is this house? Where did you find the money? Call me now. It was the now that pinched. My father's was more economical. We should talk. This is big. Ivy's read like a sneaker commercial. OMG. Is this real? Why didn't you tell me first? This affects a lot of things. Call me. I set the phone down instead of answering. I buttered the other side of my toast. I walked to the window and watched the light move along the bricks across the street as if it had nothing more important to do. When I turned back, another slate of texts had arrived, a link from Ivy to her story from last night, her, in a mirror with a martini, the caption introductions, a second message from my mother, longer, doing math out loud. Mortgages can ruin your future if you don't think. Did you take on debt? Why would you do this alone, as if I weren't the person who built budgets for a living? If I had answered right then, I would have been dragged across the old stage where I played contrition to their script. Instead, I cleaned up the wax from a candle that had misbehaved. I wrote an email about a Monday meeting and scheduled it for later so I wouldn't think about work while the day decided what shape it wanted. I told Ray I might drive out in the afternoon to take measurements for curtains. Go breathe your new air, she texted back. I'll meet you if you want an extra pair of eyes. I stared at the words your new air until they unclenched something in my chest. By noon, the messages had changed register. My mother tried kindness that felt like lace over wire. My father pivoted to logistics. Ivy sent a photo I didn't ask to see my parents at a brunch table, a man with a smooth jaw. I didn't recognize everyone mid-laugh. The caption, family night, long overdue. No mention of my party. The filter made everything look like it had been dipped in afternoon honey. I turned the sound off on my phone and did the least efficient chore I could think of, rearrange the spice drawer so the jars lined up by color, then by height, then by the unscientific category of things that smell brave. Grief and anger are loud instruments. Boundaries when they're new are softer. Mine felt like a sweater I kept shrugging deeper into so it wouldn't slide off my shoulder. I made lunch. I ate it at the counter. I wiped a perfectly clean square of granite because it made the rest of the counter look smug. And then the knocking began. It wasn't the friendly rhythm of a neighbor who'd forgotten a package. It was insistence shaped into sound, 4 hard raps, a pause, then again louder enough to make the glass in the picture frames answer back. My coffee cup rattled against its saucer like a skittish animal. I looked through the peephole and saw 3 figures arranged like punctuation. My father centered, shoulders squared. My mother rigid and bright-eyed. Ivy slightly behind them, the tilt of her mouth already editorial. I put my hand in my pocket and closed it around the key that didn't belong to the door they stood behind. They stood close enough to the door that I could smell rain on their coats. My father planted himself in the middle of the entry like a traffic cone. My mother's eyes ran an inventory of my life, the rug, the lights, whether the baseboards needed paint. Ivy lingered behind them, a half smile sheathed like a blade. "We tried calling," my father said, as if this were a fire drill I had failed. I saw I answered, stepping back just enough to keep the door from hitting my shoulder. "You're here now. What's going on?" My mother's voice had the sweetness of lemons right before the pucker. "Nora, darling, we're worried. These pictures online this house. Did you think this through?" "Mortgages, commitments, a woman in your position. My position is head of finance," I said. "I think for a living." "Finance," Ivy repeated slow, as if tasting an unfamiliar spice. "This affects a lot of things, you know." "What things?" I said. She glanced at our parents, encouraged. "Derek and I have been looking at venues, and the timeline is kind of tight. We'll be engaged soon, the wedding likely in 6 months. There's housing to figure out, and—" My father cleared his throat, deciding to steer. "It's simple. You already have an apartment. A second place is excessive. Your sister, however, needs a stable home to begin her marriage. So the reasonable thing is for you to let Ivy and Derek have the cottage." He said it so evenly that for a fraction of a second my mind looked for the trick ending. "Let them have it. You'll still have the condo," my mother soothed. "We, meanwhile, could use a quieter place as we transition from our house. If we moved into the cottage for a while, we could free up the family home for Ivy. It keeps everything in the family. So the plan," I said, is, I buy a house, you move into it, and my sister receives yours." My father spread his hands, a diplomat presenting consensus. "Exactly." It was almost funny the way old choreography tried to reassert itself. I heard the version of me from years ago asking careful questions, offering compromises that sounded like apologies. That version had been retired. "No," I said. My mother's lashes fluttered. "Nora." "No," I repeated, letting my voice be a room with only one chair. "We're not debating my finances, my decisions, or my property. You skipped my party without a word, then arrived here to demand I hand over something I bought with my money to solve a problem I didn't create." Ivy's smile tightened. "Wow, jealousy looks different on you." "Jealousy is wanting what someone else has," I said. "You just defined yourself." The silence after that was brief and brittle. My father switched to the register he used with stubborn contractors. "You're being emotional. Think practical. Your sister is starting a life. This is an investment in family stability." "I have invested in this family for 35 years, I said. "The returns have been instructive." He stepped toward me as if proximity were leverage. "You don't need 2 roofs, and you don't get to pick which roof is mine," I said, turning and opening the door wide enough that the hallway's fluorescent hum slid in. "I'm done. Out." My mother tried on outrage. "We are your parents, and I am the person who lives here," I said. "Leave, or I call building security and then the police. Choose." For a moment, the old stage pulled at us all their lines, memorized minds scribbled in margins. Then my father made a choice that would save me months of doubt. He stepped back, muttered ungrateful, and brushed past me. My mother followed a storm contained by a coat. Ivy paused in the doorway as if to say something grand, then settled for, "You'll regret this," and swept after them. The lock turning behind them sounded like a punctuation mark I had been trying to use for years. The calls began within hours, a chain of numbers that once meant holidays and now meant script readings. "Aunt Marla, honey, your mother says you're in a phase. Uncle Ray share and share alike. That's what families do. Cousin Lee Ivy is devastated. Can't you compromise?" I compromised by not answering. The voicemails stacked like cheap furniture. The texts multiplied with the speed of rumor. Then came the theater, Ivy's face on my screen, mascara-carved tears captioned, "When your own sister wants you to fail because she can't stand your happiness." The comments were a catalog of people confusing volume with truth. June texted a screenshot and a single line. "Block or breathe your call." I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and chose the second option until my lungs believed me. Work was a relief. Numbers are famously indifferent to drama. I anchored spreadsheets, corrected a dangling formula, said, "Good catch" in a meeting, and meant it. At night, I measured rooms at the cottage and argued with paint chips in the lamplight. I invited the people who had lifted my life when it got heavy and decided that a housewarming would be a thanks, not a victory lap. I did not invite my parents. I did not invite Ivy. Courtesy, I decided, is not an apology you mail to people who weaponize it. The day of the housewarming, the sky put on its best blue. The meadow beyond the fence moved like a single animal. The pear tree shook blossoms at the air. I tied balloons to the mailbox and immediately untied them because they looked like a child's birthday, and this was not that. Ray arrived first with a measuring tape and a twine of eucalyptus that made the kitchen smell honest. June came balancing a sheet cake like a waitress who could moonlight in disaster relief. Miguel rolled up with a grill that looked capable of launching small satellites. Priya and Rita brought folding chairs and laughed about the way city people treat lawns like foreign countries. By 2, the porch had spines of conversation. People wandered from room to room and left tenderness behind in the form of compliments I could stand. This light, this window, this air. I floated present enough to take it in, detached enough to file the feeling under evidence that life can be kind. At 4, the knock that wasn't a knock too hard, too entitled, rattled the glass in the front door. I knew the shape of it without looking. Ray's hand found my elbow as if to ask, "Want me to do it?" I shook my head and opened the door. My mother entered like a press conference. "Hello, everyone," she announced, turning her volume up one notch too high. "I'm Lydia Nora's mother." She offered a wave meant for a stadium. My father trailed her, carrying nothing but certainty. Ivy followed makeup immaculate dress pointedly white. The conversations on the porch slowed the way the sea stills before a storm. I kept my voice even. "You weren't invited." "Nonsense," my mother said, kissing the air near my cheek. "We're family." She surveyed the room with such practiced pride that if I'd been an outsider, I might have believed she'd arranged the flowers herself. She drifted to the center of the living room and lifted her chin. "We are so proud of Nora for making such a grown-up decision, and we're sure she's going to let her father and me move in here for the transition, since we've decided to give our house to Ivy as a wedding gift. There are silences that bruise and silences that heal. This one did surgery. It cut cleanly between who knew me and who knew about me." June put down the stack of plates very carefully. Ray's mouth made a small "oh" that contained nothing like surprise. Miguel, bless him, looked at my mother like she had just asked to borrow a ladder to the moon. I felt strangely calm, like a person who has rehearsed the emergency and now gets to execute the plan. Actually, I said, matching my mother's projection so there could be no mishearing, "No. You're not moving in. No one is, unless I invite them." My mother's smile trembled at the edges. "We can discuss this privately." "We tried privately," I said. "You came to my apartment and demanded I give my house to Ivy. You called relatives to campaign. Ivy cried on the internet. You weren't ashamed of that. I'm not ashamed of clarity." My father took a step forward, the room shifting to give him space he'd never earned here. "We are your parents," he said, reusing the line that had failed him last time, as if it might work with witnesses. "And my guests are watching you attempt to bulldoze me," I said, gently, correcting the picture frame on the wall, because pettiness can be art. "This is my home. If you don't leave, I will call the police for trespassing." A murmur moved through the room, not shock, but a collective, "We wondered when you'd say it out loud." Ivy found the camera of her own face and narrowed her eyes. "Unbelievable! She loves an audience." "You picked the stage," I said. My mother tried a laugh that only made sound. "Nora, don't be dramatic." I took my phone from my back pocket and tapped the screen. "Last time I offered a choice. Here it is again. Door or police." My father's jaw worked the old engine, grinding through pride toward prudence. He looked at the faces around him, my friends who would carry a grill up 3 flights without asking, my colleagues who knew the difference between an estimate and a promise, a realtor who had seen me at my smallest and still showed up with eucalyptus. He reached for my mother's elbow. "We're leaving," he said, and sounded like it cost him something. As they reached the threshold, he turned the required last page. "You're an ungrateful daughter." I met his gaze the way you meet weather without apology. "I'm a grateful host." "Not to you." They stepped into the afternoon, and the door closed behind them with the relief of a sinus clearing. For a beat, the room held its breath. Then June, a general in the army of women who do not flinch, clapped her hands once. "Who wants more cake?" The spell broke. Conversations found their lanes again. Someone laughed, the kind of laugh that signals a decision has been made on everyone's behalf. Ray pinched my wrist and murmured, "Clean cut." Miguel hauled his meteor of a grill back into orbit. Priya admired the pear tree like it had just won an award. The party stubbornly and beautifully became a party again. Later, when the sun tilted and made a cathedral out of the meadow, I stepped onto the porch alone for a moment. My hands were steady. The air had the taste of leaves and charred rosemary. Inside, my people were arranging chairs without being asked washing platters. I had already thanked them for arguing good-naturedly about whether lawn bowling required lawn or merely intention. I thought of the girl I had been angling to be chosen in a house where love had rules printed small. I thought of the woman I was standing on wood I paid for beneath a roof I signed for, surrounded by people who didn't make me audition. In the days that followed, my parents returned to their preferred stage, other people's ears. A narrative bloomed in family group threads. I wasn't in Nora has changed. Nora is selfish. Nora forgot where she came from. I didn't chase it. You cannot argue someone out of a story that protects them. Ivy posted a brunch photo with a man whose jaw belonged in a catalog and captioned it, "Family night long overdue." I posted nothing. I slept. I bought a tool belt because Ray said I'd need one and because it felt pleasingly literal. I learned the screw sizes of the kitchen cabinet pulls and the rhythm of the porch boards under my feet. The cottage began memorizing my footsteps. I wish I could say I never checked my phone in the middle of the night to see if an apology had arrived. I did. It didn't. Grief visited brief and efficient to pack up old expectations and label them donate. Anger tried to overstay. I made it sweep the porch. When silence finally took the seat where obligation used to sit, I noticed how much room there was. Enough for slow weekends. Enough for work that felt like building. Enough even for a future I hadn't dared to diagram. The story had changed tense, not will they, or won't they, but what do I do with the peace I've claimed? Later arrived quietly like mist rising off the meadow and deciding to stay. The morning after the housewarming, I swept rosemary needles from the porch and found glitter from the cake hidden in the grain of the table. The cottage held the echo of voices in a way the condo never had. It kept the laughter without keeping the argument. I made coffee so strong it tasted like intention, and walked the fence line with the key warm in my palm. A habit that would become a small religion. Begin by touching what's yours. Weeks threaded themselves into a pattern. On Mondays, I returned to the city before dawn, the highway a ribbon, my mind already laying out the week's budget meetings. On Fridays, I drove back with groceries and a podcast about people who repair old things. Boats, clocks, stubborn wooden windows. I learned the sound the screen door makes when you close it gently and the different sound it makes when you're angry and think you aren't. I learned that the pear tree throws shade exactly long enough to cool the kitchen by 3 in the afternoon. Ray taught me the difference between sandpaper that removes and sandpaper that forgives. We spent an entire Saturday talking about nothing and restoring a flea market dresser until it looked like an apology accepted. June declared the porch perfect for reading and less perfect for secrets. She left a stack of paperbacks like breadcrumbs. Miguel arrived with an impossible grill upgrade and a theory that every house needs one item slightly too large. It gives the other object something to aspire to. Priya and Rita staked out a corner of the meadow for bocce and brought thrift store trophies to award to whoever remembered to bring bug spray. Work stripped of background noise sharpened. The CFO asked me to pilot a new rolling forecast that would replace a PowerPoint parade with numbers that actually spoke to each other. I built a model that held up under poking, and the poking came often. With the noise of my family gone, I noticed my own voice again in meetings and emails and the calm at the end of fraught days. When the quarter closed cleanly and a tired group of department heads clapped in an unglamorous conference room, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, not vindication, just fit. A raise followed, and a team expansion and a sly post-it from Rita that read, "You are the spreadsheet Nora. The rest of us are formulas trying to be you." I didn't post about any of it. The only updates were practical, a porch repair here, a paint color there. I muted the cousins who believed volume made them oracles, and unfollowed everyone who wrote sympathy under Ivy's performance. My parents found new stages, neighbors, church friends, strangers who would listen. The messages that managed to find me wore two masks: concern and math. We worry you're isolating. Mortgages are dangerous. Did you consider? It was astonishing how often they forgot what I did for a living. I wrote one email short without furniture in the sentences, saying I would speak with them when the conversation began with acknowledgement and ended without demands. Then I filed the thread where it couldn't steal from my attention. Summer tilted. A barn sale on the edge of town became my favorite Saturday errand. The owner, a woman with forearms like rope and a laugh that showed every tooth, ran wiring workshops in the back room. On a hot afternoon that smelled like copper and sawdust, I met Rowan Pierce, a structural engineer who volunteered there because beams don't text at 11 p.m., asking for just one more revision. He had the kind of hands people trust with ladders. He taught a beginner class how to choose gauge without guessing, and wrote measure twice on the whiteboard in a hand so clean it made me want to be believed. We bumped into each other again 2 weeks later in the aisle at the hardware store, where hooks turned into existential questions. He recognized me by the Band-Aid on my thumb. "Wire 1, he said. Temporarily, I answered. We ended up in the parking lot talking about trees that lean and how houses hold the weather differently than apartments. When he asked if he could see the porch he'd advised me to brace, I texted Ray first. She responded with 3 check marks, and I'll be 15 minutes behind you with a hammer just in case. Rowan stood in the kitchen, admired the stubborn old tap, and talked to the house like it was a person who'd done something brave. We did not hurry. He had a life that didn't need saving and a respect for other people's square footage. We went for walks when the weather decided to be kind. He taught me to anchor lag bolts without flinching. I taught him that spreadsheets are just stories with numbers instead of adjectives. On a dry Sunday, we laid out strings for a pergola and argued companionably about the angle of shade. He brought a toolbox. I brought lemonade and the certainty that I would keep the key to this door in my pocket until I wanted to share it, not because someone demanded to see it. One evening, he said almost to the floorboards, "Kinship isn't a loan people can call in." I didn't realize until that moment that I'd been waiting to hear another adult say something exactly like that. It didn't fix anything. It made space for what wasn't broken. On a trip to the feed store to bribe the neighborhood raccoons into leaving my compost alone. I met Maple, a brindled shelter dog whose entire personality was hope. She adopted me by leaning her whole weight against my knees and sighing. "That's consent," Rowan said. Maple turned out to be equal parts doorbell and therapist. She collected tennis balls under the dining table like a dragon horde and slept with her head on my shoes as if to keep me from escaping my own home. The first time she chased light across the kitchen, she skidded into the cabinets and looked embarrassed. I pretended not to see and gave her a promotion anyway. The cottage became not just a place I owned, but a place that acted on me. I learned the sound of rain before it arrives. I planted basil and thyme and failed spectacularly at tomatoes. The meadow didn't care. We hosted Small Things with Big Feeling, a book club that only sometimes discussed books, a Sunday stew night that convinced Miguel to respect vegetables a Thursday, where colleagues came straight from the office and traded jargon for stories. No one asked for a tour of the linen closet. No one with a microphone voice declared arrangements that erased me. My family remained consistent in their inconsistency. Ivy's engagement photos bloomed across mutual acquaintances' feeds: Tool, Champagne, a man with a jaw that staged its own entrance. The wedding date was announced by people who weren't me. The only outreach I received was indirect a message from Aunt Marla that read, "Wouldn't it be nice to put this behind us at a beautiful event? Wear blue. It's slimming." I stared at the screen until the letters lost meaning and wrote back, "I wish her a day as lovely as she wants. I will not be attending." I set the phone down, went outside, and learned how to prune a rose without bleeding. When the wedding weekend came, the meadow was loud with crickets. I drove to the river and rented a kayak, the kind that forgives beginners. I paddled until my shoulders told me what they were for. Somewhere across town, my parents posed with strangers and called it a circle. I floated beneath a bridge where someone had carved "stay" into the rail with a pocket knife. I did. There wasn't a single moment when peace arrived. It was accumulation, the drawer that no longer stuck, the avoidance I no longer practiced, the way Maple didn't bark at her own reflection anymore. The rolling forecast at work went live, and the first month we closed in 3 days flat. The CEO sent a thank you that was probably written by someone else. I didn't mind. Rowan and I built the pergola and argued about where to string lights until June came over and settled it with higher than you think, lower than regret. We ate pears warm from the branch and failed at jam that first time because we were too impatient to let it set. We ate our failure over ice cream and decided to call it a strategy. Every so often, a number I recognized would appear on my screen. I let it ring into the part of the house that collects sounds and turns them into weather. Once I answered. My father's voice was careful. "We miss you," he said. "We can work something out." I told him what something meant. Names of things that happened said plainly. Apologies shaped like verbs. No more campaigns waged through relatives or the internet. Silence, then the old hinge creaking. That's a lot to ask. It is, I said. That's why I'm asking. We ended there civil, the way people are at the edges of countries. 6 months after the housewarming, the meadow went tawny. The pergola threw a respectable shadow. My team at work ran without me for a week and didn't set anything on fire. I took that as both compliment and instruction. Rowan fixed a stubborn step without telling me until I nearly tripped on how smooth it had become. Maple learned to drop the ball at my feet instead of on my toes. The cottage had memorized our footsteps and forgave our clumsy. On the last warm evening before autumn, made up its mind, I carried 2 plates to the porch. Ray and June argued softly about whether a person can be too prepared. Miguel tried to balance a bocce ball on his head. Priya read the weather with a skepticism that should be taught in schools. Rowan passed me a glass and bumped his shoulder gently against mine in a language we were learning by practice. The pear tree let go of 1 fruit at a time like a clock choosing its own seconds. I thought about doors, how some refuse to close and some need to, how most of the opening we do is internal. I thought about the girl who waited for permission and the woman who built a place where no such forms are required. If reconciliation ever knocks in a shape that looks like truth, I will hear it. The porch boards carry sound all the way to the kitchen. Until then, the key sits where it belongs, the lights hum in the right places, and when I say home, I mean a verb. The evening thinned into crickets and the soft clink of plates. We stayed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.